Back in the 1940s and 1950s, the vogue in psychology was what was called behaviorism.
Right.
And behaviorism, just a very quick summary, is basically humans and all other animals are kind of like a box. You have an input, and something happens on the inside, and you have an output. And so if you know what the inputs are, and you're able to control them, you can actually influence or control the output. And psychologists like B.F. Skinner and Ivan Pavlov and all of these folks operated on this model of this is how humans work. Control the inputs and you can control the outputs.
These were the experiments like having something in a box and pushing a lever to get a reward. It was all this kind of stuff.
Operant conditioning and all of those things. The thing is, there is a certain amount of truth to conditioning that people learn patterns or animals learn patterns and associations and will do certain things that they know lead to certain rewards. But as an overarching model of how humans and other animals behave, it's actually quite wrong. And there's another model that's actually far more accurate, in my opinion, in terms of how and why people do the things that they do. And this is a concept called perceptual control or perceptual control theory. And there's a book on the personal MBA reading list, Making Sense of Behavior by William T. Powers, that goes through this in exhausting detail. It's a wonderful book. And the general idea is it's probably best to use an example here.
Yeah, because otherwise it gets a little weird.
Right. Okay. So let's say you go outside and the sun is out and it's shining and bright, and you find that it's too bright. So what do?
Put on some sunglasses, probably.
Right. And what does that do?
Well, it brings the level of light coming into your eye into a more desirable range.
Exactly. And that is a very simple model of perceptual controls theory. Okay. There's a certain range of light, from too low to too high, that our eyes like to stay within that range. And if the light becomes too low, like you turn off all the lights and it's night.
Then you take off your sunglasses.
You take off your sunglasses or, flip a light switch.
Right.
Or you turn on a flashlight. Or you can do all sorts of things. But what you're doing is you're bringing that perception, which is how much light is entering your retina, you're bringing it from too low into the range of somewhere between, of acceptability.
Right.
So not too low, not too high. Simultaneously, if it's too high, you do things like put on a hat or put on your sunglasses or go indoors or, do something else to bring the light level down. Okay? So our bodies and our minds have all sorts of these, think of it like a perceptual control circuit. It's controlling for something very specific, could be light. Think of how a thermostat works.
Right.
Like temperature. Right. There's a range of temperatures that's acceptable. And you set the thermostat, and if it gets too low, well, the heater kicks on and it brings you back up. And if it gets too high, the air conditioning kicks on and it brings it back down.
That makes sense.
We essentially work in the same way. And if you look at, all of our perceptual faculties, like our eyesight and our hearing and our sense of touch.
And even our internal temperature.
Yes, internal temperature. It's all a feedback loop, which is part of systems, and we'll talk about that later. But even down to, the level of our cells, our body needs, or our blood needs a certain amount of glucose in it to keep us operating.
Totally.
And so if it becomes too low, our body upregulates it.
Right.
If it becomes too high, our body downregulates it. This actually goes all the way down from the cellular level, all the way to even some very complex social behaviors. Like, am I a good person? That's a perception of, the outside environment that's averaged over time. And if you feel like you're not being a very good person, you start to want to do things to bring that average up. So it's interesting that, all the way from the lowest cellular level, all the way up to the most complex social behaviors, we have perceptions that we want to keep in control.
Okay.
And if they're out of control, then we start doing things to bring them into control.
Makes sense.
And, what those things are just depend on our environment and what's available to us. But as an overarching model, and I highly recommend looking at Making Sense of Behavior to get the full story on this, because it's a lot to fit into a very short video. but it's a model that helps you think about why people do the things that they do, or how they decide to do something versus not decide to do nothing. Because if something's already under control, you don't do anything about it. If the light in the room is acceptable, you're not going to start flipping switches or putting on sunglasses. It's fine. So you do nothing. So perceptual control theory is a very simple, but the ramifications of it, I mean, it's a very overarching thing. But perceptual control is a much better model of why people choose to do the things they do. And if you're interested in this particular topic, I highly recommend looking at Making Sense of Behavior.